crafty friends, it's Christina. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're doing something that I haven't done in a very long time. I'm making a Halloween card. I haven't made a Halloween card since my son and my nieces and nephews were all younger. They're all in their 20s now. And I just was feeling a little inspired over the weekend and decided to do a little bit of a Halloween themed card. And I think I might be even doing some more because I had a lot of fun making this. First, I just want to tell you I am doing a voiceover for today's video in that I got inspired and I was just crafting away and had the camera running and felt like it was just the video that I would do a voiceover later and just work on creating. So let me know in the comments below if you like the voiceover version or if you like the more live, I guess you could say, tutorial or instructions on what I'm doing while I'm creating. I'm using a lot of Tim Holtz products today. I've got the Haunted die set, Moonlight die set, a stamp set, and lots of inks coming your way. First, I went ahead and did my die cutting. I used the Haunted die set, which has the haunted house, and then the Moonlight, which has the moon in several different sizes, and these adorable bats. Not that bats are adorable, but these little bats that there's actually a couple of dies in there, and they come in different sizes. I die cut the moon in 80-pound cardstock and did the smaller size. And I really hesitated on whether I wanted to do both layers, the bottom layer and the top layer. I think originally my thought was I was just going to do the bottom layer, but then I'm glad I ended up cutting out the top layer because once that's layered up, it looks so good. The Haunted die set, which is our haunted house, does come with a die plate to die cut extra elements that you can use to add to your house, but I wanted to go with a dark, spooky looking nighttime scene, and I just cut it out on black cardstock. I did go ahead and punch all of those little pieces out using my little pokey tool, which I don't think is the right term for it, but that's my little Tim Holtz pokey tool that I use all the time for getting all those little pieces out when I do my die cutting. Now I decided I want my windows for my spooky house to have some kind of backdrop. So I just grabbed a piece of the scrap paper from the Moonlight, or the moon rather, and cut it out into strips that would fit behind the haunted house. So you need to tell me, are you a Halloween card maker, fall card maker? Do you do both? Do you do one or the other? Do you do one and not the other? I'm generally not a Halloween card maker. But this year I was just feeling inspired and enjoying so many of the different products that are out there and watching Tim Holtz recently. It definitely got me in the mood to make some Halloween cards. So that is what inspired me to craft this week, because Tim is always encouraging us to just play. And that's what I was doing this past weekend, just playing. So now for something I have never done in all of my card making, which has been more than 10 years. I'm going to make a nighttime scene, and I have never done that before, and I had so much fun. I did use my distress inks. I didn't use my oxides. I used my distress inks in my mini cubes because that's what I have. I don't have a lot of the full cube or full ink pads of the distress inks, and boy, did my fingers get nice and inky, and I should have put down one of my grip mats for holding my cardstock in place. I thought of it later on, but for some reason I didn't think of it when I was doing this, and I was really just into playing. So I have a couple different inks to blend this background. I started off with Chip Sapphire, which is that gorgeous blue tone, and then I'm coming in with Villainous Potion, and I'm really just working that onto some 80-pound cardstock. And it took me a little bit, because at first I just thought this was a hot mess, but as I started to blend more, I started to really like it. Once I was done with that, I came in with Uncharted, I keep saying Uncharted Mariner as my second tone of blue. And it sort of shows up on my background, but not completely. But once I came in with Black Soot, that definitely brought that background out more. I just felt like it was too bright when I was first blending it, and first time ever doing a nighttime scene. So this was all brand new to me. I've never mixed colors like this before, and I had a lot of fun doing it. I had a lot of ink on my hands, but I had a lot of fun doing it. I do figure out later to use one of my grip mats just to hold everything in place. I'm coming in with black soot, and this is where it starts to kind of come together for me and looked more like that nighttime scene. I love the little blotchy sections like the purple and the blue, and then having the black around the edges definitely brought in that nighttime scene. And I just had so much fun playing with this. I never tried it before, and it was a lot of fun. This card just kept growing and growing. You can see my finished background here, and I was inspired to do some sewing on my card. And I always love to put some stitched lines on the side. And for this one, I did some stitched lines and then incorporated a couple zigzag lines. Really love the way this turned out. I ran off the edge a couple of times, but it's not meant to be perfect. It was meant to just add that detail. And I love the way it came out. I was starting really thinking about using like that dark yellow color. I think you may have seen the spool there. And maybe doing an outline in dark yellow, but I love the white. It just showed up really nice. And yeah, I'll just stitch around this using my sewing machine. Just a side note, I do use 2 different needles. So I have a needle that is for my card making, and then I have a needle if I'm doing any kind of sewing of fabric and stuff like that. So I do kind of separate those 2 things. Now that I have my sewing done, I am going to start inking up and working on my moon. Now I know that I am super overexposed right here, but I do figure it out in a second and it will be easier to see. I'm inking this up using some Lost Shadow Distress ink, and I brought out my grip mat so it makes it a little bit easier. I'm just inking that with the Lost Shadow and a blender brush, and when I put this together, I'm pretty surprised on how realistic it looks to me. Like if you're outside and you're looking up and you can see the dark parts of the moon, I just really notice it. It looks really good together. I've been having a battle with my liquid glue, and it's constantly clogged for the past week or so. It's always clogged. I'm just getting to the end of the bottle, and I think it's giving me difficulties. But I'm using my Barely Arts glue and adhering the top layer of the moon to the bottom layer. I can't say it enough. I really love how this moon turned out. I'm just setting an acrylic block on the top to let the adhesive dry, and then I am going to start working on my little pieces of cardstock that I cut at the very beginning and inking those up so that I can use them to put behind the windows of my haunted house or the silhouette of the house. I'm using Fossilized Amber for that color. I'm just blending that on with a blending brush stick, whatever you call them. But I'm just blending that on there, and I'm not going in there to make it nice and even and smooth. I am just really adding that color. There's blotches here and there, but it came out really good when it's poking behind the windows. So I am going to get those all done, and then we can go ahead and put them behind the windows. But before I do that, I need to do a little work on my bats that I cut out with the glitter cardstock. Because the cardstock has a white core or a white backer on it, on the edges you can see the white. So I'm taking a Tombow marker and I am just running that along the edges of the bat to cover that up so it's not quite as noticeable when I look at the side or look from the side. So I'm going to start messing around and kind of laying out how I think this is going to be set up on my card. I'm going to definitely put the moon up in the upper right hand corner. So I'm just going to glue that down with my Barely Arts glue, which there I am working, trying to make sure that I'm not clogged again. And I'm just going to go ahead and adhere that down. I added the adhesive to the back of the moon, but I also put a little bit in the corner to make sure that it's nicely adhered up in that corner. And then I'm just going to work on putting the strips of cardstock that I blended with the Fossilized Amber Distress ink to the back. I'm going to adhere those to the back of my little haunted house. And with that, again, just using some liquid glue in case I need to move things around. And once I have that all adhered down, I will then put that underneath an acrylic block again, just to make sure everything's laying nice and flat and it dries nice and flat. What I love about the liquid glue is it gives me the opportunity to move things around if I need to. But of course, I always end up with a little bit coming out from the front, and I made a little bit of a mark on the front of my haunted house. But once that glue dries, barely even notice it. Next thing I want to do is just figure out what sentiment I want to use. And I'm really loving the I'm just here for the candy, or I'm here for the candy. And I also wanted to do the trick or treat, but the I'm here for the candy would not exactly fit anywhere in the front of the card with the size of the house. And so I ended up using that a little bit later. I added some foam adhesive to the back of the haunted house, and that's going to go down first. And then I'm going to work on getting my sentiment done. Again, I'm using just foam adhesive for the back and then adding some liquid glue to that just to make sure that I have that little bit of wiggle room to set things down. I'm going to take my favorite pair of scissors, which are the Spellbinder scissors, and cut off the corner of the moon that's hanging over the edge. I'm just going to be super careful that I don't accidentally cut off anything additional, just the parts that are hanging over. And I don't know if you noticed that yellow tape on the back of my card. That is what's holding the loose strings or the loose thread from the sewing edge that I created. I just taped that down to keep it in place so that it's out of the way. The next thing I'm going to do is start stamping the sentiment. I did go ahead and decide that I'm going to use the trick or treat sentiment on the front, and then I'll use the other sentiment on the inside of my card. I'm going to stamp that out onto black cardstock. I use some anti-static powder to make sure that I don't have any oils or anything from my hands on the cardstock, and my embossing powder only sticks to the Versamark ink. I keep a waffle flower grip mat inside of both my mini Misty and my larger Misty. I did go ahead and remove that because I am using a red rubber stamp, and you need that extra space when you're doing the red rubber stamp because they have foam built in. I'm just going to put my Misty back in place, or my grip mat rather, back in place now that I'm done stamping, and I will start working on adding my embossing powder to my stamped sentiment. I'm using the Hero Arts Ultrafine White Embossing Powder. It is one of my favorites. I have two favorites. Simon Says Stamp is my other one, and I reach for those two the most. Normally what I do is I add 2 coats of embossing powder to my stamped sentiment or my stamped image, whatever I'm stamping. I'll sprinkle a coat on, tap it off like I normally do, and then add another coat. And this way I know I have good coverage, and it usually works pretty well each time. I'm going to go ahead and heat this with my heat gun, and just when I finish, I'll let it make sure it dries nice before I do anything, like take a cloth and wipe off any of that anti-static powder so you don't have that white dust. The next thing I'm going to do is just cut this down because it's going to go on the front of my card. So I'm just using my paper trimmer. Love the guillotine trimmers. They are fantastic for cutting out strips like this. And I just did a guess on what size I'm going to need, and I cut that down. I'm going to put my sentiment at the bottom of the house, which does kind of cover some of the stitched, but it will hide that little area in the corner where I ran off with my sewing machine. So I'm going to add some foam adhesive, and put that down at the bottom only because I am going over the house, which does have foam adhesive behind it. So I'm just going to add a bunch of little foam squares to the back of this. And then I will add some liquid adhesive to the top where it'll be overlapping the house. And I'll put that down as my sentiment. I'm just about ready to start putting my card together. But before I do that, I want to stamp my sentiment on the inside. I love that I'm here for the candy is a perfect sentiment to go on the inside of this card. So I just stamped that out using some VersaFine Black ONYX ink, which is a beautiful dark black rich color, and I love using that for my sentiments. So I stamped that on the inside of my card base, which is an A2 size card. It's a top folding card. It was cut at 4 1/4 by 11, and then it's scored at 5 1/2. I keep these on hand in my drawer right next to me here at my desk, so they're just easily accessible and I could just grab them. All right, I'm all set now to go ahead and adhere this to the front of my card base. I'm going to grab my liquid adhesive and hope, oh, never mind. I thought I was going to use liquid adhesive. I'm not. I'm using a tape runner. I was going to say I was hoping that my liquid adhesive wasn't clogged again. I'm going to adhere this down right after I send a text message to my card base, and I will then be ready to start adding my little bats to my card front. There's one thing that I didn't do that I wanted to do before I start putting everything together, and I will show you at the very end how I work around it. But for now, I'm just going to go ahead and adhere those little bats onto the card base. I'm taking the smallest bat and putting that up at the moon. The medium-sized bat I'm going to keep a little lower than that, and the larger bat will be down further. So it looks like the one up on the moon is further away, and then the one that's down in front of the house is closer to you. So I'm going to adhere those down using some liquid adhesive. And I think at this point that I'm done, but I'm not. I did think of something that I wanted to do to this card, but I actually stopped filming and then realized that I wanted to do something different. I wanted to add a little bit of white splatter to my background, and I thought about doing this when I was done blending the background. But I think I got distracted with my sewing machine and my idea of adding some stitching lines onto the card, and I never went back and did it. And then I thought about it when it was all done. I'm thinking it needs a little bit of something else. So I figured out a way. I used a piece of cardstock as like a shield to my haunted house, and I took some picket fence, distress paint, picket fence, and put a little blob of it on my desk. It was a little too thick, so I just sprayed some water onto my desktop and was able to thin it out a little bit. Now, I did run into an issue with that in that my purple from my background kind of absorbed into the white paint, and I had one that was sort of purplish. But in the end, what I did was I kind of wiped it off, and then I took a white Posco paint pen and filled in that spot to kind of fix it. And it worked out fine. It came out pretty good. And that's my card for today. I hope you enjoyed today's video and enjoyed the little bit of a different format with the voiceover of my instructions or my tutorial on how I put this card together. I'm going to leave a link to all the supplies that I used in today's video down below in the description, or if you happen to be on my blog, they'll be there as well too. Thanks everybody for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye.